The original Parasite Eve is one of my favorite PlayStation games, standing up there with Final Fantasy VIII and Klonoa: Door to Phantomile. It's a fantastic blend of JRPG combat and survival horror, a genre that was incredibly popular at the time thanks to Resident Evil, and a year later, Silent Hill. The story is a sort of sequel to the original novel of the same name written by Hideaki Senna. The game was popular enough to get a sequel that ditched the RPG elements almost entirely, opting for a more generic Resident Evil ripoff. Unlike the previous game, this one is a lot more divisive. However, after this there was nothing. As it turns out, Square had, for whatever reason, lost the rights to the series, and we never heard of it since. That is until December of 2010 and the release of The Third Birthday. The Third Birthday is the third entry into the Parasite Eve trilogy, and is a third-person shooter. And that makes the third time that I've said the word third in one sentence. This is, for me personally, the simultaneously easiest, yet hardest game to talk about. It is both one of my favorite games of all time and my favorite third-person shooter, though I have to admit I've barely played any, yet it is also my most hated game of all time. For this reason, to make it easier on myself and everyone who's, for whatever reason, watching this video, be splitting up this video into two parts. The first one is the one you're currently watching, where I'll be going into gameplay, aesthetic, music, and a little bit of story. While the second part will be a rant of sorts about why I hate this game with a passion hotter than 19 trillion burning suns. I'll also be talking about the story and a very specific scene that makes me mad every time I have it seen on my timeline. So with that out of the way, how about we finally get this rock rolling? This game takes place an unspecified amount of time after Parasite Eve 2, and yada yada nobody cares. As with the previous two games, the characters were designed by Tetsuya 10,000 Bells Nomura, and the music was composed by the ever so wonderful Yoko Shimomura, who both worked together on the Kingdom Hearts series. The new tracks are all fantastic and the rearrangements of old songs are just as great. I would say something more, but the game has an arrangement of Joy to the World and I don't know what I could possibly say more to that. As mentioned before, the game is a third-person shooter set in a dystopian New York. Now, one would assume that aiming in a PSP game would be kind of cumbersome due to the camera having to be controlled via the D-pad, which is below the thumb pad. And you would be right. However, the game mitigates this by locking you onto the nearest enemy when holding down the left trigger, while tapping it places the camera directly behind Aya. Because of this, the challenge doesn't lie in attacking the enemies, but in dodging their attacks and keeping the pressure up, as well as keeping a close eye on your ammunition. If you run out of ammo for a gun, except for the regular pistol, which is the weakest weapon in the game, that's it. You aren't getting it back unless you find a pickup. The same goes for your health, because while there is regenerating health, it'll only be useful when you've already cleared up an area. And there are no health pickups either, unlike with the ammo. This is where the game's main mechanic comes into the picture, the overdive system. Gone are the mitochondrial powers and mutations of old, due to Scare losing the license. Instead, replaced by this new set of abilities. Whenever you run out of ammunition, health, or just want a better spot to attack your enemies from, you can hold down the triangle button to transfer your consciousness to another soldier on the field, obtaining all of their remaining health, ammunition, and weapons. This allows you to quickly move around the map and adapt to every encounter. If you do enough damage, you're also able to dive directly into an enemy, killing them from the inside out. Diving into another soldier can work as an emergency revival, as before Aya passes out and dies after losing all your health, you have a small window of time in which you're able to quickly dive into another body and save yourself. Holding down the left trigger without shooting to simply lock on allows you to fill up a gauge. Once it's full, every soldier in close range to you will also attack that enemy, opening them up for an overdive kill, which is when you dive into the enemy to kill them. When the liberation gauge at the bottom of the screen is filled up, you can also press triangle and circle at the same time to activate Liberation Mode, which temporarily increases all of Aya's stats, makes her a lot faster and more agile, and replaces your guns with laser pistols that do an immense amount of damage. Using this mode, however, is incredibly tiresome for Aya, making her unable to move, leaving her open to attacks. This creates a very interesting risk versus reward system that allows for an enormous amount of approaches to any given situation. The damage Aya takes is visually represented in how her clothes break and tear, which is something that I'll be talking about more in detail in the second video. Defeating enemies grants you experience points and, eventually, level ups. This is, after all, the third game in an RPG series, believe it or not. Gaining a level up restores all of your health and ammunition, as well as raising your maximum health and energy. On top of all this, you can customize Aya and her abilities even further by using Overdive Energy, which you can find in missions and obtain after achieving an Overdive kill. You can set these into a 3x3 grid before each mission, and they customize your abilities and stats. In this hubward-like area, you can also buy new clothes and choose the weapons you want to start each mission with. After each mission, your performance will be graded, and the better you did, the more bounty points you obtain. Bounty points are basically your currency in this game, and you'll need them to buy new equipment. Needless to say, I quite enjoy the combat in this game. It's fast, frantic, and keeps the action going, while never getting stale, especially on hard difficulty, where 2 hits mean your immediate death, forcing you to take a much more strategic approach. Of course, much like anything, this system doesn't come without its flaws. For instance, you cannot move the camera, and your dodging is vastly downgraded while locked onto an enemy. This isn't an issue in wide open areas where you can move around a lot and dodge really, but it can make your camera get stuck in some very unpleasant places. The game also has a wide arsenal of weapons, but if you just keep upgrading the ones you already have, you don't need any of the new ones. And you could just beat the game by only starting a mission with the pistol, though it would take forever. Another issue are the frequent radio interruptions. A lot of times you just have to stand there listening to people talking on and on for what feels like an eternity, and it really kills the pace at times. Despite all that is going on screen though, the game always maintains a consistent frame rate, which also helps with keeping the action going. However, only a handful of enemies exist, and there really isn't much variety in how to approach these specific enemies. However, the bosses are more than unique enough to make up for it. However, all of the patterns are quite predictable, and they would get stale pretty quickly, which is way more often than not why they swarm you with multiple enemies at once. And these scenes are easily the highlights of the game. You can walk around the stages and explore a little, but everything is very empty, and it's best you're going to find an ammo recharge, which at the rate you're actually shooting is sometimes useful and sometimes not. On normal difficulty, the game is quite challenging, while on hard difficulty it is downright brutal, forcing you to dodge nearly every attack. It's honestly a damn shame that this game never got an HD remaster or port to a proper console, as the stages can go on for quite a while, and you cannot save mid-stage, most of the time that is, making it kind of impractical to play on the go. There are some very nice looking costumes for Aya, such as a swimwear costume or a maid costume, but my favorite is personally this really slick white jacket here. As well as one based on a character from another game, being Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII. And this is the part I've been dreading the entire time. Now I have to talk about the story, whether I like it or not. The Third Birthday was written by Motomo Toriyama, the man most infamous for the horrid mess of a story that is Final Fantasy XIII. With him worked a man by the name of Toshimitsu Takeuchi, who worked on some anime or whatever, but that's not important right now. What matters is that this game's story and characters are the biggest flaw of the game. A flaw so big that it can potentially ruin the entire experience, especially if you're a fan of the first two games. So here is a quick synopsis of the flaming piece of garbage that is the Third Birthday's plot. The Third Birthday stars a woman called Aya Brea and some other people with the same names as characters from the old games. In what is basically a rehash of the first game's intro sequence, you see the new threat, the Twisted, standing on the Statue of Liberty. They were created because of some kind of time paradox. This forces everyone to build a time machine and send Aya to the past. But then it turns out you don't actually play as Aya, but as her clone and adopted daughter from the second game, Eve, who overdived into Aya's body after killing her at her own wedding to prevent another time paradox from happening in a scene that actively forces you to kill the real Aya in gameplay. And then we cut to the streets, get a title drop and see the credits roll. I despise this plot. I loathe it. I hate everything about it. And it makes me mad to simply think about. It's the main reason I consider this my most hated game of all time. But I don't want to talk about any of it any longer. Not now, not here. This mess is so large it deserves its own video. Because I don't want to fill this one with unnecessary negativity. I genuinely love this game for its combat and its customization, and I want to tell you all to play it. While the game is really cheap on an actual PSP, I highly recommend emulating it with an actual controller and mapping the D-pad to the right stick. This makes aiming a lot more comfortable and makes the entire thing feel a little bit better. Also, the game just looks very good in HD. And with that out of the way, there's really nothing positive I can say about the game anymore. So I think we should wrap this video up here. I'll be seeing you next time when I'll be ripping and tearing into this game's story and how they ruin Aya's character, while also ranting about a single shower scene that goes on for less than a minute for probably half an hour. See ya then. Cheers.